These are the Swifts and Clouds switches. Brothers not only on paper, these switches are purely complementary towards each other, being both halves of the same pie. Made by the brand new manufacturer HMX, these switches use a combination of techniques that have been adapted from their previous lines of switches, but have also come to use their own new techniques. Design-wise, these switches both use the same type of design, but although these switches are essentially brothers, they definitely do not sound the same. They each use a different set of materials, so supposedly these Swifts sound a bit more thocky, and the Clouds are a bit more clacky. But let's take a look at these for ourselves and find out. These switches are relatively similar, but there's still a few major differences that change the way that these sound. First off, the Swift switches are designed by QN Studio, and the Cloud switches are designed by XL. Both of these switches use HMX's LY material for the stem, but the top housing on the Swift switches are made from a P3 material, and the top housing on the Clouds are made of a PA12 material. The bottom housing for the Swifts are made from a PA 3.0 material, and the bottom housing for the Clouds are made from a PA 2.0 material. Now, each material does something different to the sound signature. So here's two small charts to show what each sound of each material closely resembles. This chart goes from most thocky to least thocky, and this one goes from most clacky to least clacky. Both these switches also use a 22mm single stage extended spring, and also have factory looping on the spring, the stem feet, and the stem sliders. These switches also have an operating force of around 42 grams and a bottoming out force of around 50 grams. Finally, these switches have a pre-travel of 2mm and a total travel of around 3.9mm. Both switches will end up setting you back around 35 cents per switch, so these are in the low to mid price range. Now, just like the Zenhai switches, we'll be using the Keyless 65 plateless for both the sound tests, just so that we can see how clacky and thocky these really are. Both these switches sound really nice and defined, and honestly, these do sound a bit close and similar to each other. The Swifts definitely sounded a bit more thocky and had a bit more of a louder sound profile to them. But on the other hand, the Clouds did sound a bit more clacky with a bit of a muted sound profile. Now, both these switches did have a bit of a silent, inconsistent scratch to them, but unless you listen very closely and pay really close attention to the slight sounds of the switches, you shouldn't really have to worry about any scratching or other impurities. Also, one thing to note is that the bottoming out sound is not harsh at all. It seems to sound just as loud as the top out sound for both the Clouds and the Swifts. Also, one thing I really like about these switches is that they don't sound dead or extremely muted. In fact, it's the opposite. These switches have a very poppy-like nature to them, so even while you're typing, you end up feeling a little bit more energetic and not as tired. Now, going on to how these feel, I can confidently say that since these both use a 22mm single stage spring, these are not very hard to press on. These are both very light switches and have a relatively quick bounce back. Thanks to the factory looping done on the switches, these also feel very smooth and also very responsive. Not only do these switches both glide like butter, but they also feel very soft as well. Structurally, both the Swifts and Clouds are pretty much the same design-wise. Both uses HMX's new MX molding technique, and both are designed to allow air to freely pass through each switch while still allowing the stems to sit tightly within its channel. This ends up leaving the keystroke feeling free and not jammed up with a bunch of air. Also, these switches both nearly have a full travel distance, so that means each press isn't cut short and you have much more of a length to press down on. Now, in the end, you might be asking, is there really anything different between these? My answer is simple: yes. Again, these switches are pretty much brothers, so while they might sound a bit similar to each other on paper, they definitely have some defining characteristics that are different and unique both feel and sound-wise. The Swifts and Clouds are some of HMX's newest and best switches yet to be seen, but you should really see the difference yourself.